Hey guys, my name is Cannon and I'm a reviewer for MakeUseOf.com. So if you're an eReader user, you may have heard of the Reinkstone R1, which is a 10.1-inch color eReader with note-taking capabilities. So this is an early review unit and the firmware is still in development. So everything about it is subject to change, particularly the software. That said, large format e-readers cost a fortune, so it might grab your attention when one sells for less than $500, particularly if it has a color screen. But is $430 from a notoriously unreliable platform like Kickstarter worth it? If you're interested in buying one, you might want to pause and consider a few things before backing the project. So first of all, Reinkstone is a subsidiary of Whywood or WeWood. WeWood is an original equipment manufacturer, and they make devices for other companies. Whywood got in trouble a few years ago when its client Whiskey botched a Kickstarter for the ePad. The tablet received almost no firmware updates, and a significant number of backers didn't receive any product at all. Reinkstone's public relations team assured me that they are not related to the ePad, and I've spoken to several industry experts about WeWood's trustworthiness. Few wholeheartedly trust Reinkstone, although it seems its parent company, WeWood, was not responsible for the ePad Kickstarter, and they were just the manufacturer. But I do not think much of Kickstarter as a funding platform. That said, I couldn't find any evidence that WeWood is a fraudulent company, and they do appear to be a legitimate business. So let's first talk about the hardware and whether or not you're getting a good deal. The R1's hardware is low-end. For example, the 64 gigabytes of internal storage has very slow read and write speeds, and its processor is designed for the low-end market on a 22 nanometer production node. However, the R1's $430 price seems to jibe with other devices on the market, and that's because 10-inch e-readers tend to cost a fortune. For example, Onyx's black and white Book's Note 3 costs $550, and Kobo's Ellipsa will set you back $400. So overall, I don't think the Reinkstone R1's price is too good to be true. In fact, it seems like a reasonable price point for a Kickstarter of this type. The most interesting thing about the R1's hardware, though, is that the reflective display, which is completely different from e-ink's color e-paper Kaleido Plus, the R1 uses a technology called display electronic slurry, or DES for short. DES uses the same black and white particles that e-ink uses, except rather than creating pixels through microcapsules, it floods an entire layer of the display stack with black and white polarized oils. And then it uses a series of voids, which they refer to as cofferdams, as the underlying structure which helps shape pixels. The cofferdams, along with a polarizing layer, apparently contribute to the high color saturation levels of the color filter layer as the ambient light more easily passes through the display stack. I used Michael's summary from the good eReader.com's write-up on DES technology, as well as reading the manufacturer Goo Display's white paper on the subject. I've linked to Michael's article in the full review, and I highly recommend checking it out if you have the time. E-ink is a tried and tested technology with over a decade of development, whereas DES may suffer from teething issues in the software and manufacturing process because it's so new. For example, the engineering sample that I have on hand has permanent image retention around the edges of the display. So Reinkstone's decision to use a relatively untried technology is a little risky, and I'm a little concerned that they won't be able to fix some of the problems with it by their November launch date. For example, almost every company that I've heard of that's tried to implement bistable displays on e-readers has met with universal barriers to development when they were trying to develop new waveforms to drive their display units. But even though DES technology might be untested, just going off of a surface level comparison between Kaleido Plus and DES, the differences are compelling. First, DES has a significantly higher level of color saturation. Just comparing the R1 screen side by side with the Nova 3 Color is enough for the differences to really pop out. You can see that pretty much all the colors are far more intense, except for blacks, which are slightly less visible on the DES panel. And the second point is the DES panel is quite a bit more detailed compared to Kaleido Plus, but you can easily make out pixelation as well as some other clarity issues with the panel. One potential deal breaker for backers is how the edges of the screen on my unit, which I mentioned earlier, has an inability to display blacks. My guess is that there is physical damage to the DES panel underneath, and that the polarizing structure in the display stack has somehow lost the ability to attract black pigments. Although I'm not an engineer, and I don't know for certain whether or not that's the case. It could be an issue with quality control on early production units, but regardless, if something like this made it into the final product, I'd want my money back. And as with all Kickstarters, you can't get your money back even if you don't like the product. So were the reading experience not completely damaged by extreme levels of ghosting and buggy software, I'd say that the R1 would make a superior comic book reader to everything else there on today's market. Unfortunately, I can't say that because as it stands, the R1 is not ready for consumers. And finally, there's the note-taking experience, which is the least buggy part of the Reinkstone that I tested. Note-taking is relatively straightforward. You use the passive stylus, and it has a replaceable soft tip, to write on the screen. The screen does not have a glass cover on its face. Instead, it uses a plastic coating. While I didn't manage to scratch this unit, I did notice a high amount of scratching was already present on the screen when I received it. The touchscreen is not a Wacom either, and there doesn't appear to be any variable pressure-sensitive touch layer in the software. There's no option to change the pen tip thickness either, although there are supposedly 4,096 layers of pressure sensitivity for note-taking. They don't seem to have implemented pressure sensitivity yet. However, the note-taking experience is excellent and similar in quality to a Remarkable. The input latency, which is listed at 40 milliseconds, feels almost like you're painting on canvas. Honestly, if you're writing at a relatively normal pace, it looks like you were writing in real time without any input delay. On the downside, there doesn't appear to be any pressure sensitivity, as I mentioned earlier. Overall, for the money, you're getting a fairly good deal, but that's to be expected for a Kickstarter in which the consumer takes on literally all of the risk, and the project may fail or the finished product may not be at all what the manufacturer promised. And as with all electronics, hardware is only half of the picture. Software makes or breaks a project. And unfortunately, the R1 software is not there yet. They do have until November to fix the many firmware and software issues that plague the R1, but because of the newness of DES technology, I can't say whether or not they will be able to meet those deadlines. So my takeaway is that it looks like there's enough excellent features that I'm going to suspend my judgment until the firmware is updated later this month. And that's it for this review for early release of Reinkstone's R1 10.1-inch color e-reader. For a full-length review, as well as some close-up shots of the R1's DES screen, please visit makeuseof.com. And if you like this review, please remember to like and subscribe. Thank you very much for watching.